It's Enrico Nardini from PlayUnplugged.com and beginning of the month again, and time for another Play Unplugged vlog. First thing I'd like to say, just to get it out of the way, is oh my gosh, please excuse my disheveled appearance. I desperately need a haircut. Unfortunately, I've just been very, very busy, and it has not been in the cards yet up to this point in the month. Regardless of which, it's been a really busy month, gaming-wise, both for me personally and also just industry-wise. Beginning of the month, a lot of new releases occurred very recently. Vampire Counts just came out not too long ago, like maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago. It was released, and it was kind of like boom, back to back. And I don't know if there was a problem with as far as getting the stuff out or whatever, but it seemed like Vampire Counts had been out for a second, and then bang, GW hit with another big release with this big push to kind of reinvigorate the fan base around Lord of the Rings. Talking about Vampire Counts very briefly, you can check out. I already did a review of the Vampire Counts Army book, and it's already up on Play Unplugged. And if you go down, if you look over at, I'll post a link underneath the video. But if you look over on our bar of recent articles, it'll be up under recent articles, or you can go on the search bar and just type in Vampire Counts, and you'll find the review. That being said, there's not much more I need to say than what I already wrote in the review. Is the book high quality? Yeah, it is. The recent releases of pretty much every Army book for the current edition that's been released, and I'm talking about the hardcovers now, has all been high quality. But the reality is that, and this isn't just a GW problem. This is a problem I foresee happening in miniature gaming in general. Is that a lot of these game companies are starting to price out a lot of customers. Now, I'm kind of in a luckier position. I mean, I am by no means wealthy. At the same time, because hobby is such a huge focus in my life, and I don't really, I don't really have a ton of other things that I do. I work, with Play Unplugged, and the game industry, and that also is my hobby. So there isn't really a lot of me going out and doing, like I don't golf, I don't hunt. So, and I'm sure those are really great hobbies. I'm not disparaging them, but at the same time, this hobby that I also do games journalism for, kind of it's a huge part of my life. And so, for me to be like, hey, well, this is starting to get a little bit expensive, is definitely saying something. And I've always been a staunch defender of pricing in games, and so maybe that could be the focus for this vlog, is just talking briefly about games and why they cost what they cost. And I have some ideas about this, and maybe maybe you guys out there have some ideas and you'd like to leave them in the comments below. But my initial impression is where we are right now. Games are getting very expensive, and the thing that I'm worried about is, and I'm speaking more specifically about miniature games, but honestly, top tier role-playing games are very expensive book-wise also, and a lot of the top tier board games, the ones that are most, the ones with the most gimmicks, and I'm thinking, I'm not saying it's just Fantasy Flight, but I'm thinking of Fantasy Flight here because they have a large portion of games that are like in the $80 to $100 range. And I'm certainly not saying they're not worth, though. I've gotten a lot of fun out of tons of their games. Like, you can play a game like Mansions of Madness many, many times, and you'll have a different experience. And is it worth the money? I certainly think so. But I feel like people are getting sticker shocked by these games when they walk into a game store. And what I worry about the most is parents getting sticker shocked and then not introducing their kids to gaming because of the perceived value, the a lack of perceived value. And I do think a lot of it's perception, because when it comes down to it, when I buy a box of miniatures for, say, $30, like a troop unit for a Warhammer, or a Warjack from Privateer Press, a $30, $40 model, actually the hours I take modeling it and painting it and then eventually playing with it, I really do feel like it's a good dollar to entertainment value product. That being said, it's one of those things where you have to you kind of have to change the way people think about those kind of things, but also it just seems like some of these things, like $41 for a hardcover book that you have to play the army. It's harsh. It's harsh. I mean, like, because you're already you're buying theoretically you're buying the miniatures from the same company. You're also buying the paint. You're buying primer, you're buying tools to build, you're buying glue, and then suddenly you're asking a parent to throw down a couple $100 so that their child can play the game. And okay, maybe that's not a lot of money, but to me, it is. It definitely is, and I think to a lot of other people, it is too. Some game companies have gotten around this by, there are some games that are very, very skirmish oriented, and so even though their cost per miniature, and this is something that I really think is important to dispel some myths. Um, GW, Privateer Press, probably get accused of this more than other companies, but that like their miniatures are very high priced. It's a very expensive game to play, and then like these other companies. So the alternative are these other smaller companies. And for a while, actually, Privateer Press was considered the alternative, but now I think people are kind of getting wise to the reality that miniature games are just expensive. Um, that being said, it's interesting that these alternate things. But the reality is that the miniatures don't cost any less. You just don't need as many of them to play a game. A lot of these skirmish games require 5 to 10 figures, and so the initial investment's much cheaper. And that's not to say there isn't value in that. There may very well be. But the idea that somehow you're getting more value in the sense of you're getting more product for your money, I think is kind of dubious. You might have a different opinion. Once again, you can leave that in the comments as well if you have a different opinion, or maybe you have an example that I'm not familiar with, and I'd love to hear about it. So that's kind of where I'm coming from as far as what is the value of what's the value of games? That's not going to stop. There, and the reality is, and maybe this is why these companies feel they can charge what they charge, because honestly, it's not going to stop me right at the moment from playing, but I will say it's definitely my purchases over, in recent memory for personal use, not for use with the site or anything like that. But my purchases for personal use have definitely gone down a little bit, and I'm more choosy. I try to be more choosy, and like the latest thing is not like, oh yeah, I got to get that latest thing, unless of course it's something that I feel like would be valuable for the website, which is a great excuse to buy more games. so. But yeah, that's kind of like my thinking on it right now is that it's hard, and I think one of the most difficult things, and I think where GW probably and possibly Wizards have it the hardest, is they, Wizards being part of, and GW itself as an entity is publicly traded companies. Now, I am not, I do not claim to be any kind of financial expert. I don't have a degree in business. Uh, I'm just kind of an outside observer with a very general working knowledge of how a publicly traded versus privately owned company works. And I do think the public model is very problematic for an industry like games, tabletop games specifically, that you can make a profit off of, but it's difficult to continually make an ever increasing profit. And that's kind of the messed up thing about corporate culture right now anyway, is this idea that a profit is not good enough. Like making money is not good enough. You have to be constantly making more money than you made the day before. And what that leads to, I believe, is it leads to jacked up prices for games for sure. But I also think it leads to cutting of staff that have been there for a while and maybe really paid their dues, and not only paid their dues, but they're good at what they do, to bring in new blood. And of course, there'll be new blood that's young and hungry, and they'll probably do a good job too. But it kind of stinks to see, like some very, to see some very good game designers, out of work, or struggling because basically the company felt like, oh, well, we've been paying this guy too much for too long, and by cutting this, we can get this sudden bump, and the shareholders will be happy. And so it's one of those things. I mean, a lot of these, and like I said, Wizards and Wizards and Games Workshop come to mind first because of that publicly traded nature. Um, this idea of pleasing investors. Yeah, pleasing investors is important, but pleasing the customer is important too. And there are times when definitely there's a lot of there's definitely a lot of internet railing against both of these companies, unfortunately. And I do think they're both good companies at heart, and I also think that they're very creative, and I've always liked their products. But it's hard. It's hard when you see a book that, for example, when the Orc and Goblin book came out, it came out with a sticker price of like $37, which I said was like, this is a high quality book, but I mean, like it's still kind of pricey at $37. And then for the next, for the most recent one, which only 3 books difference, and possibly I want to say maybe a year difference as far as like when one was released to the other, and then suddenly the book is 40, it's $42, and you can tell me that's not a lot of money, but when does that end? When does the price increase on that stuff end? And it doesn't only hurt the customer, it hurts a lot of the local game store owners too, because they have to sell the product. So it's kind of like this very, we're getting into this kind of like this, where you're increasing prices to make more of a profit, but you're selling less stuff, and you get this kind of Ouroboros thing happening where the snake is eating itself. And so, like I said, I could be totally wrong. This is just my impression of how it is. And if you have a different impression, feel free, like I said, to leave it in the comments. I have a pretty thick skin, so, no problem. Go ahead and leave it in the comments. Of course, it's got to be, appropriate. So, keep the swearing down and all those other things. But feel free to leave a comment if you have an opinion. To get off that kind of downer note, talking about pricing, there are some cool projects going on that I'm doing personally. One of them is a friend of mine and also a writer on the website, Andrew Lotz, is going to be running this Warhammer campaign that takes place in Mussolini, and I hope I'm saying that right. And if somebody knows that if I'm saying it wrong, please pull my geek card. That would stink, but I think I'm saying it right. It's a Bretonian city. It's partially sunken and it's haunted, and so we're playing this map-based campaign. I'm very excited to be involved, and let it never be said that I actually, this idea that I'm anti-video game. I'm pro tabletop game, but I certainly think there are some video games that are cool. And one of them, from my childhood, now I don't own any modern systems. I don't own like an Xbox or any of that stuff. The last system I owned was probably like a Dreamcast, and I got rid of that a long time ago. So I definitely like Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis and Nintendo and Sega Master System and stuff like that. So Castlevania, specifically Castlevania 4, but I also like 1. The Castlevania series was always really cool in my mind, and since my army is themed around hunting vampires because the undead are such a big deal in this city, the army that I'm working on is Empire, and I made a converted figure. Now I'm using all these really cool Perry War of the Roses figures because I wanted to do something. Now it's funny, I mean, I'm saying I want to use these figures that aren't GW very much on purpose to show that there are more figure ranges out there, and you can explore these other figure ranges. But saying I'm using these Perry War of the Roses figures, I mean, like, the Perry brothers are they're such a part of GW. These practically are GW figures. They're slightly smaller scale, and so what worked perfectly is this is Simon Beaumont, and Simon Beaumont is a vampire hunter who was originally lived in the land of Bretonia, and then he became infatuated with the religion of Sigmar and became a witch hunter. And so he's going to be my hero of legend for the campaign. And so what I did was I took a Boromir figure, a running Boromir figure that I had, because I was like, wow, that's kind of a dynamic figure. It's got a good pose, and it's got the one hand up. And so I did a little bit of clipping, and I put a little pack here to cover up where I clipped off the sword and the horn of Gondor. And then I took the sword part off, and I sculpted on this whip that I actually made out of. It's got some it's got some little bits and bobs and a little bit of green stuff sculpting here, but I actually made it out of a thin paper clip, believe it or not. And so that formed the whip. Totally fun. When I finally we've been playing this for a couple weeks, and when the idea finally struck, I was super happy with the end result. With only a few seconds left, the only other thing I can say is obviously Dark Ascension was just released, and I wish I had more time to talk about it right here. I don't. But needless to say, Mike Eaton's going to be covering it more, and there's a lot of great stuff, so look out for that on Play Unplugged also. Guys, have a great month gaming. I can't wait to talk to you guys again. Hopefully do another unboxing this month and some more Play Unplugged radio. See you later.